All right. Very good. All right, I'll just introduce us here for a moment. All right, guys. So today we'll have a special conversation, not about cactus as we always do, but we'll talk about mushrooms. Psilocybin mushrooms in a shamanic context, something that is missing greatly in the world, I would say. And this is the subject I wanted to speak about for a long time, in a way that it could be properly understood. So finally, I have somebody here who is definitely qualified to speak on that from an immense experience with mushroom. So we'll start from the bio, like you just share your experience with psychedelics, with DMT and mushroom, which were your main tools of exploration, and then we'll move from there to Mexico, to Maria Sabina, and your experience there. Okay. Alright, guys. So it's a totally spontaneous conversation. We just spoke about this in a ceremony yesterday, and I thought it would be good to make a video about this. Okay. Alright, Michael. So maybe you want to introduce yourself and kind of briefly move through your background, like military, sure, combat, and then firefighter, and then psychedelics. Like you're a veteran in many senses. So let's start from that. Where are you from? Your name?
Sure. Well, my name is Michael Endicott, and I think before I say anything else besides that is that I need to start this off with a little bit of gratitude and express my intentions. And since I've been on this journey, I've realized how important it is to thank Mother Earth, or Pachamama, thank Huachuma medicine, mushroom medicine, thank you, Sergey, and definitely thank my wife, Elizabeth Endicott, because without her, none of this would be possible.
I'm sure she'll appreciate that comment. Okay, let me just see here if it's recording. Yeah, it's recording. Good. Just to be sure. All right. So
I think a good place to start would be with my childhood, because that literally is where my experience with psychedelic medicine began. And at the time, I didn't realize it was medicine. But when I look back now, and I tell this story, it'll be clear to everybody that it actually was. So I grew up in a broken household. My father was in the Secret Service, married to my mother, and they had a very dysfunctional marriage. There was alcohol abuse and drug abuse in the house, and there was a lot of violence in the house. And as a young boy, I was exposed to that till about age 12. We were living over on the East Coast of America in Washington, D.C. because of my father's job. And after all the trauma that we went through, my mother finally divorced my father, and we moved to the West Coast, to Washington State, to be with the rest of my extended family, grandparents and cousins and aunts and uncles. And so it was there, when I was 15 years old, I was first introduced to magic mushrooms. And I was an outcast, an outsider, because I had come from the East Coast. And now I'm in this new world of West Coast, Northwest mentality. And I met some people there who took me under their wing. And what happened was I started smoking marijuana and got in with a certain group of people who were out there doing drugs and exploring. And we were all 15, 16 years old. And one day somebody came to me and said, "Hey, would you like to come out and pick magic mushrooms with us?" And I had never experienced mushrooms. I really didn't even know about them. I just knew about weed, and that was the extent of my plant medicine and drug use at that time. And so I went out, and we went out into a cow pasture in Washington State, and we picked magic mushrooms. And the variety that we were picking is called Psilocybe semilanceata, and better known as Liberty Caps in Washington State. And so the other guys that I was with just kind of showed me the ropes, how to find them, what they look like. And we went out that day, and I probably picked 30 or 40 small specimens. And I took those mushrooms home, and that evening at about 8 o'clock, I told my parents that I'm going to bed early. And I went down into my bedroom, and I ate the whole bag of mushrooms and laid down in bed. And journeyed the entire night, and that was the beginning of my experience with psilocybin mushrooms, psilocybin-containing mushrooms, and so psilocybin-containing mushrooms, sorry. And so with that, I continued to pick mushrooms and hang out with these people, and it became, during the winter time, or in the rainy season in Washington State, it became a regular event to where, and it was so important to me because of how powerful that first experience was, that I would actually skip school. If it was raining, I would be not in school, but I would be out and going around cow pastures all over the neighborhoods where I lived and picking mushrooms all day, every day. And it really impacted my life. I don't really understand why, because I wasn't addicted to them, but what was really interesting about the effects that the mushrooms had on me was that when I took the mushrooms, I didn't feel like I was getting high. I felt like I was just normal. As a young boy going through all of this trauma that I went through with my mother and father in the divorce, I was so just broken up inside and just withdrawn, depressed. And back in a time when depression wasn't even a thing that was talked about anywhere. But I know that I was depressed, and I had so many different problems. I couldn't integrate with society, with family, very withdrawn. And when I took mushrooms, it opened up my world, and that depression, the anxiety associated with it, the desire to be withdrawn and be myself was completely disappeared every time I ate those mushrooms. And it was a very difficult situation for me because my parents and other adults around me found out about what I was doing, and it caused even more problems, from corporal punishment, physical corporal punishment, to restrictions and all types of stuff like that. And it was a very difficult thing for me to understand and to deal with, because can you imagine as a 15-year-old boy to try to look your mother in the eye and explain to her, but Mom, when I take this medicine, I feel okay, I don't feel sick. And I tried to explain that to her. And you can imagine, and all the people who are watching this can imagine, if they would have tried to tell their parents a similar story when they were 15 years of age. And so, my mom just looked at it purely as, you're abusing drugs and this has got to stop. And I was determined that nothing was going to get in my way of that, because I really wanted to feel normal, and I liked the way I feel. The mushrooms at that time, I had psychedelic effects, but it didn't take me out of this setting in this universe. I was very well connected and grounded in what was going on around me, and I felt really good about what was happening with myself and my life. I found love for myself, and I found love for my parents and my family, and for everything that I was doing. And when I wasn't on mushrooms, I felt really withdrawn, and I felt really lost, and I couldn't understand that. And so throughout my high school time, I continued to do this. I would pick enough mushrooms in the fall that would last me throughout the summer and the winter, and I would be able to basically keep myself fairly well balanced, and just to. So what happened with me is that when I was taking this mushroom, like my time in high school, I wasn't a problem kid. I was never getting in trouble. I actually got really good grades in school, but I was a cannabis smoker and a recreational drug user. But the one thing that really kept things in balance for me was the mushrooms, and that kept me focused on what I was supposed to do. And I think if there was one way to describe it, is it just it added balance and focus to my life. It was kind of like I guess a good way to describe it is a mood stabilizer. And so I graduated high school at 17 years of age, and I joined the Marine Corps, and I went off into the Marines to boot camp. And I went through boot camp, and I graduated boot camp in, it must have been in late October, and I went home on vacation, and it just so happened that the mushrooms were growing at that time. And I went back out, and I got I guess what I like to call is a booster dose of mushrooms then for about a week, using mushrooms every day.
That's a booster I support.
Right, and so that was able to really change or stabilize my feelings about the trauma that I had just gone through in the Marine Corps, and I didn't Marine Corps boot camp, and I didn't really recognize it as trauma at the time, but I definitely recognized that when I came home and took the mushrooms, it really just balanced me out after that experience, and so that what that led to was about a 17-year career in the Marine Corps. And throughout my career, I would do my very best to schedule vacation at a time when I knew the mushrooms would be growing back home. And I would go home on vacation and pick as many mushrooms as I could so that I would have enough medicine to keep myself balanced throughout the year. And at that time, I didn't need to really, because of how focused the Marine Corps was, I didn't need to eat mushrooms every day. But to be able to consume mushrooms, say 4 to 6 times a year, really just helped me out a lot and kept me balanced in what I was doing. And later on, after that, during my time in the Marine Corps, people started growing cubensis mushrooms in their homes, and so that started to show up out on the market, and I started to gain access to that. And so I didn't need to necessarily go home and pick mushrooms at home. I could go out and find places where I could buy them, and then I had medicine for myself on a regular basis.
So did you have it in Iraq?
No. One thing I want to make perfectly clear in this story here is that during my time in the Marine Corps, I never used any kind of mind-altering substances on the job. I was very focused, and but that said, my experiences with mushrooms is that when I eat the mushrooms, they're active in me for a long time. Like I have the 4 to 6 hour psychedelic effect, but the residual effects last me for weeks or months, depending on how much I take and how the experience is.
Okay.
So. Anyways, I served in a Marine Corps Special Operations unit called Force Reconnaissance. My job was going out and collecting intelligence on enemy positions and enemy activities and reporting back to the higher headquarters to tell them what the enemy was doing. And so this was a very intense job. It required a lot of training, a lot of very intense training, lots of skills. And it led me to the first Gulf War, where I was a recon Marine, doing reconnaissance of the minefields in Kuwait and up into the Iraq. And then after that, a few years later, I found myself in Somalia and part of the United Nations Quick Reaction Force in Mogadishu, to help protect and rescue UN workers who were being taken hostage, or basically anything, any mission that would meet the needs of the United Nations forces that were there in Somalia. And I saw a decent amount of action there, but actually I wouldn't call it action, I'd call it trauma. I experienced a lot of trauma there. Trauma being exposed to the dangers that I was exposed to, conducting military operations there, but also trauma in being exposed day in and day out to what was going on with the people that were there. The brutal killings, the famine, disease, starvation, all of it. And that really had a profound impact on me that I took home with me back to the United States. And so in 1999, I retired and came back to the United States. I had enough of the combat deployments, overseas deployments, and I wanted to connect with my family, and so I came back. And what I realized when I got back, I was extremely lost and extremely dysfunctional. And I turned to cocaine abuse and alcohol abuse, methamphetamine abuse, and I was just completely lost. And I don't know why it happened to this day, but I lost connection with my medicine. And it wasn't a long time, but probably for about a year and a half, I just completely lost it. And a lot of it was because of the amounts of alcohol that I was drinking, trying to suppress the trauma that I had experienced. And alcohol really did
disservice.
Yeah, a disservice for sure. And then one day, after getting out, after going through a divorce, I found myself in a little one-bedroom apartment by myself with cocaine around me on the table and loads of alcohol, and I just felt deathly sick. And a voice within me came to me and said, "Michael, you need to get back to your roots." And a light went off in my head, and I just remember, like, how could I have possibly forgot that? And so it didn't take me too long to re-network and get mushrooms back into my life. And when I did, life immediately changed for the better. I went out and I got myself new employment with the Seattle Fire Department, which started a new chapter of trauma in my life. But initially, things started to go really well. Once I brought mushrooms back into my life, I was able to cut down on my alcohol consumption. Mushrooms actually led me, I used mushrooms to help get me off of cocaine and methamphetamine and alcohol at one point. So just through that right there, I was able to get myself completely clean through the use of psilocybin-containing mushrooms. And so I got back into a regular routine where I had a great job with the Seattle Fire Department, and I was using my mushrooms on a regular basis. Again, I'd like to caveat that I never brought mushrooms into the workplace or used them there.
Only in your home and free time.
Correct, yes. And but I got to a point where, as I used the mushrooms as a grown adult, I started to notice different things about how they were healing me. And so I started to dive deeper into the mushrooms in researching every bit of information that I could about mushrooms, and not just the different types and the chemistry and that type of stuff, but more about historical usage, anthropological history of mushrooms in societies. And mostly in Mesoamerica, Mexico is where the most of that is. And I really dove deep into that, and I started to find that as I did that, I started to have a much deeper connection for the mushroom. And I was feeling a lot of things. I noticed that actually even that my mushroom experiences started to change once I started to become more connected to how mushrooms were traditionally used by indigenous people. That really had a big impact on me because I started using mushrooms outdoors more. I would take mushrooms and go out hiking and go out camping or go to the beach, and my connection with nature started to happen. And it just really opened up my life a lot better. But I will say that my life with using mushrooms wasn't all a beautiful rose garden because of my job with the Seattle Fire Department and the trauma that I was experiencing there. I started back using alcohol again, and I started using it very heavily. And I would literally get off of shift, and I would go immediately somewhere to a store and buy some alcohol, and I would be drinking it in the car on the way home. And as I started to use alcohol more and more, I noticed that my mushroom use started to decline. And I started to have problems with suicidal ideation and deep, deep, deep depression. And there was other drug use in there from time to time, not what it was when I first got out of the Marine Corps, but those things started to return. And so I struggled through that for quite some time. And but every time when I got into the real depths of my depression and anxiety, and when I felt like there was no hope left, mushrooms would always creep back into my life. And so I kind of just, for a couple of years, went through this kind of a pendulum action, where I'd be over here and I would be really sick from alcohol and drugs, and then I'd come back into the mushrooms again, and then I would get myself totally clean and I'd feel great again. And so there was a little bit of back and forth going with that for a while. And At one point, I had gotten myself really cleaned out using mushrooms, and I started to really dive deeper in the use. So I started to understand that the way that I can prevent myself from going back onto the alcohol was to start microdosing regularly instead of, taking mushrooms once a week on the weekends or a couple times a month. And I started to use mushrooms almost daily, pretty much. And once I did that, that pretty much kept me off of the alcohol the way I knew it then. So, going out and drinking a couple 6-packs of beer or a fifth of whiskey, like really hard binge drinking, that started to end completely once I started microdosing. And so I went through my fire department career, and I really realized that with what I was struggling with suicidal ideation and substance abuse, that I needed to retire from that job as soon as I can, or as soon as I could. And the reason for that was just the trauma that I was experiencing was so much that it affected me so much inside that I felt like I really needed to escape that. And alcohol was the one thing that just provided that for me. And so that's, I retired from the fire department in 2013, 14, right in there. And I went into the cannabis business. And what happened during that time is that once I got free from the trauma from the fire department, I had this plan where I was thinking all along, okay, that once you remove yourself from this, I'm going to start on a new mushroom program. And I had just this whole new idea of microdosing. And what happened is that I went into that and I started eating mushrooms every single day. And after over 600 days, I stopped counting. I was counting how many days in a row that I did it on the calendar.
Listen,
and I drank
2 years in a row.
Probably over that. Like I said, I stopped counting. I'm sure there was
taking a lot of mushrooms.
Well, for the first year, I was taking above a microdose. So I was taking between a quarter to a half a gram of mushrooms. And what I learned during that period is that after consuming mushrooms, at that point, I had been doing it for about 35 years. I noticed that when I only took like a quarter gram, just a little tiny bit of mushrooms, I would have a full psychedelic experience. And so I don't know why, but the mushrooms were speaking to me through it, and they said, don't microdose, continue to do what you're doing. And I could do my work on the mushrooms, I wasn't so altered that I couldn't function. And so I was a fully functioning psychonaut who was using every single day. And so I would go into the cannabis stores that we opened up, and I would work there, serving and selling cannabis to people, ordering cannabis. Doing everything in the business that I needed to do. And I was using mushrooms, and that got me through the day. It gave me the energy, it gave me the hope, and it also was working on me on the inside, I believe, helping me out with some past trauma, and just helping me to stay balanced, basically, keeping my mood stabilized so that I could focus on what I was doing. And so, that went on for quite some time. I was in the cannabis business for about 5 or 6 years. I'm still an owner, but I'm just retired from all of the management part of it. And so once I finally retired from the cannabis industry, I was actually retired from the cannabis industry. I had 2 partners that I was in the business with, and once the business got up and running and doing really well, I was voted out of the management team.
I don't think we need to go there.
Okay.
Let's just keep that out of it.
That's fine.
Let's focus on the mushroom thing. So let's move from personal use towards Mexico.
Okay.
You know.
Okay.
And and then see how we navigate
Right.
through the terrain of Oaxaca.
Sure. So there came a time in my life after several years of microdosing and using a lot of mushrooms to help stabilize my mood and get me through my my experience in life with work. And I finally retired, and I decided that I really wanted to get out there, and I wanted to go on to a sort of a vision quest. Because what I failed to mention earlier is that when I was a young boy and I was in my teens and early 20s, and I was starting to learn about mushroom and learn about my relationship, I really did a lot of studying into, as I kind of mentioned, indigenous use of mushrooms in other places. And I always carried with me this vision that I was going to go to these places and use mushrooms in a traditional fashion with a curandera or a maestro, a teacher of plant medicine.
Mushroom shaman.
And this was a goal my entire life. This was something that was inside of me, but it really was buried when I was going through all these traumatic times. I mean, those dreams of doing that wasn't there. And when I finally retired, I think that was the first dream that came back to me and said, Michael, you have a chance to go and do this now. Live your dream. And the mushrooms were calling to me, as they had my entire life. They were calling to me. And so my vision quest was to Oaxaca, Mexico. And my wife supported me on this. We went on a 6-week vacation through Mexico. The first 2 weeks, a couple of weeks of it, we just did some basic tourist stuff. And then we went up into the Sierra Madre Mountains. And I know my wife, I need to mention this because she was just so supportive of the whole thing. And we had about a 4-week period in our vacation where she followed me up into the Sierra Madre Mountains on little tiny collectivos and taxis, so uncomfortable. It wasn't her type of vacation. It wasn't, and I could see that in her, but I could see her love and her support for me as we went into Oaxaca and into the Sierra Madre Mountains. And so my first experiences with mushrooms in Mexico, in Oaxaca, was in a little town called San Jose del Pacifico. And it's a very well-known town. It's on the western slope of the Sierra Madres, and it's up at about 6,000 feet. And it just gets that wonderful moist air that comes off the Pacific Ocean and rises up and turns into rain. And it brings up the most beautiful mushrooms that I've ever experienced. And so we went to San Jose del Pacifico, and the interesting thing about this town, the town is a complete mushroom town. So when you walk down the main street, you have restaurants and bars, and even on the restaurants, they'll show pictures of hamburgers and a mug of ice cold beer, and there'll be a picture of mushrooms right next to it.
Mushroom hamburger, man.
You can go into most of the restaurants and cafes there and order a cup of mushroom tea right there over the counter, and they'll serve it to you. All of the hostels.
And why you're just tripping on the street?
A lot of people, well, you're in a beautiful mountain area, and there's a lot of camping areas with little cabins and stuff like that. And so what most people do is they'll rent a cabin in the woods, and then the little vacation place that you went to will sell you mushrooms right there. And then you can go back to your cabin, have your own ceremony, eat your mushrooms, and then you can walk around in the cloud forest, because that's really what you are, is in a cloud forest there, and heal. And so throughout my experience with mushrooms, my wife stood in the background and just supported me. And this time in San Jose, she ate mushrooms with me. And one of the things I would like to say about just to mention about the mushrooms for the listeners, is that so the first place where I started my journey up in Washington State, it has the most, how do I say this? It's they have more different types of psilocybin containing mushrooms than any other place on the planet. There's, I want to say, at least approximately 10 different types, and I've consumed probably 8 out of the 10 there. When I came into San Jose or into Oaxaca, Oaxaca was a dream for me because very similar to Washington State, you could go out and find 4 or 5 different types of fresh mushrooms for yourself to consume, and they all have a little bit different alkaloid contents. So there's definitely a difference in the effects that you have, and so it was a really interesting thing for me to mix the different types of mushrooms and experience the different types of effects that the mushrooms could give you.
So what drew you to Maria Sabina?
So Maria Sabina, that was the end goal of my vision quest, was to find out where her family was, where she took mushrooms, and see if I could connect with somebody who knew her or who was trained by her. So how I connected to her was when I was a young boy, I saw a copy of the classic Life magazine that Dr. Gordon Wasson had put his story in and pictures in about magic mushrooms, and that was really the story that helped bring the psychedelic revolution to America, and definitely the use of and recreational use of magic mushrooms. So within that story, I saw this lady's face, I saw her picture, and I read about what she was doing, and just looking at her face, I don't know what it was, but I had this instant connection, like I was just like completely fascinated with her. The look in her eyes, the energy that her picture was sending me out of that magazine told me, you have to find out where this is happening and you have to be a part of it. So after a couple days in San Jose del Pacifico eating mushrooms, we continued our journey on, and we went to a little town called Huautla de Jimenez. And that's even higher up in the Sierra Madre Mountains, a little town, very famous for mushrooms. And when you walk around this town, you're in Mexico. It's predominantly Catholic, but everywhere in the architecture, in the artwork, in the clothing, in everything, there were mushrooms everywhere. And the best that I can understand through my studies is that is the birthplace of modern day ritualistic medicinal use of mushrooms, using mushrooms for healing people, right there. There's no doubt, you can Google it and you'll find stories about cave paintings of mushrooms that were over 6,000 years old in France and in Australia and other places. And so, yeah, maybe it did or maybe it didn't happen. But in modern day society, say like in the last 1,000 years, Mexico is the birthplace of modern day mushroom therapy. So I got into Huautla and I felt it right away. The mushrooms were all around me, like I said, in architecture and artwork, it's just everywhere. And so I got a hotel with my wife, and I explained to her what I wanted to do, and she supported me, and she said, well, I'm going to stay here in the hotel and watch some TV, and you go off and do what you got to do. And so I was kind of like, okay, how am I going to get myself to this point? Where am I going to find these people? And so I went out and went to a taxi driver and said, take me to Maria Sabina's place. And in probably some pretty bad Spanish. And the driver knew exactly where to take me. And so we went on this long drive up this hill, just winding road, going and going and going. And we got to the top of the hill, and there was just this little shack that was made out of cinder block and metal. And it had been there for a long time. Mushrooms painted all over it. And I knocked on the door. And somebody came out, and I tried my best in Spanish to tell them I would like to come in and talk to somebody about mushrooms. And they also had a little tiny museum there, really small, in a room maybe 10 feet by 10 feet was all it was, with just pictures of Maria Sabina, with some very famous people like John Lennon and Pele, and a lot of famous people who came to her in search of wisdom, in search of healing and help, and in search of knowledge to learn about these mushrooms that she had been using. And so there was lots of interesting pictures and stuff in there. And the interesting thing is that the museum used to be the Maloka, where she would hold ceremony for all of these people. And so it was a very powerful connection. So I was standing around, I was looking at the pictures and stuff, and then a young man came in, and he introduced himself to me as Maria Sabina's grandson. And it was really interesting because the energy just got very powerful, a little bit weird, almost a little bit overwhelming for me, and we were just both looking at each other's eyes. And he knew why I was there. And he looked at me and he said, "Would you like to come back tonight at 7 o'clock?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Okay, I'll see you then." And that was as simple as it was. There was no talking about what kind of mushrooms or how much or anything like that. It was just, he looked at me and he said, "Would you like to come back tonight?" And it was a very powerful moment for me because it was an invitation. And it was an acknowledgement to me from him that I know why you're here. I can feel your energy. It was almost like a namaste moment. I see you, you see me, and we know what's going on here. And it felt really wonderful. And I know I came back to my wife, and I was like a little boy on Christmas Day, just jumping around and happy. And I'm sure I had a good cry. It was just an amazing emotional experience, just that exchange in her place. At that point in my life, that was one of the most energetic experiences that I had ever had. And so what I did is I showed back up there that evening at 7 o'clock, and we talked very briefly about me making a donation, and that's what he said to me. He said, "Hey, he never said you have to pay me this for the mushrooms." He said, "We would like you to make a donation for our family that's here." There at Maria Sabina's compound, I'd just like to say that they have a work group there of family members and people who are connected to her through the lineage, through medicine and family both. And they're doing work there, healing work, 365 days a year. And so there's a lot of donations that go to them to help them to help them to build a better place to teach people and to help heal people. So we talked a little bit about my donation. I made the donation, and then he walked me out through the little compound that they have up on top of this hill. It's on the highest peak in Huachuma, and it overlooks all of Oaxaca. It's the most beautiful piece of property in Oaxaca, looking over everything. And walked me through a courtyard and then into a little cinder block room that was about maybe 15 by 15 feet square. No windows, just a door. When you walk inside, it's no finish on it, nothing, just the bricks. In one corner there was a bed with some blankets on it. In another corner was a chair and a table. And then in the center of the room there was a broken chair that when I sat on it, I felt like it was going to break at any moment, and it wobbled. And they asked me to sit in the chair, and the grandson told me, "Wait here, and in a few minutes your curandera is going to come in and begin the ceremony."
Just a second to see if it's still recording here. Yeah, it's fine. Mm-hmm.
So I'm sitting in this wobbly chair and looking around, and I was really starting to wonder what I had gotten myself involved in. And because I'm sitting in the chair looking at the wall in front of me, and there was a picture of Jesus and a couple of other pictures of other Catholic patron saints. And I'm not a religious person, and I wasn't looking for a religious experience. So I was really wondering how this fusion between Christianity and mushrooms, how that was going to come together. I was really confused about that. And there was also on the floor lots of big globs of wax everywhere from the candles that they burn in there. So after 5-10 minutes of waiting, what I would consider to be, at that time, a very old lady, probably in her late 70s, early 80s, walked into the room. And though she looked extremely old, she looked really agile, and the energy that came out of her was just powerful. When she looked at me, she looked right through me. Like I just felt my heart just skip a couple beats. And again, I asked myself, Michael, what are you doing here? And she sat down in the chair, and she took out 3 packages of, they were banana leaves with some rope wrapped around them to keep them closed. And she laid all 3 of them on the table. She cut the strings on them and opened them up. And in each packet, there was a different type of fresh mushroom. So in the first one she opened up, there was what we would call Psilocybe cubensis. In Mexico, that's called a San Ysidro. Then in the other packet, there was a called Psilocybe caerulescens. And then in the last one, there was the Psilocybe mexicanas, which were a classic one that Maria Sabina used for years. And they're a little smaller mushroom. But both of those mushrooms were not familiar to me. The cubenses were. But these were all grown in Mexico, so this was all very new to me. But one of the things I would like to mention about those 3 piles of mushrooms is that when I looked at each pile individually, I wouldn't, on my own, voluntarily eat a whole pile of any one of those, much less all 3 of them. I would have probably ate half of one of those piles. But the curandera looked at me and didn't say a word. She just looked at me, and then she looked at the mushrooms, and she motioned for me to eat them without saying a word. And I understood that she wanted me to eat all 3 piles. And that was I had to think about this real hard. I didn't take more than about 10 seconds, but I realized that, Michael, your life is about to change as you know it. I didn't know how, but I knew it was coming. So I looked at her, and I said to her, in my best gringo Spanish, muchos gracias, and in probably under 30 seconds, I ate all 3 piles of those mushrooms. And when I was done eating them, I looked up at her, and her eyes were wide as saucers, and I could just read her mind, and she's like, now I could almost feel her saying, what have I gotten myself involved in? It was quite funny. And I asked her for a glass of water, and she got me that. And after I drank, she sat me down in the chair, and the ceremony began. She lit up a bunch of candles, and then she started smudging me with a variety of different herbs and misted alcohol, blowing it on me. And she had feathers and bundles of herbs that she was shaking on me and rubbing on me, and she was singing. And she wasn't singing in Spanish either. She was singing in the Maztec language. And that was just added to everything, because I didn't even understand what she was saying, and it was just so powerful. And I knew that something incredible was about to happen. So after about a half hour of the opening ceremony, she stopped and she went down and sat behind me so I couldn't see her. And I just sat there looking at the wall, looking at Jesus, looking at the candles. And it just started to wash over me in the moment, the energy of everybody who sat in that chair before me. And all the curanderas that came in there before this lady. And just the deep, rich heritage. And just what I had gotten myself involved in. I actually really did understand that I was becoming a part of history and a part of tradition and something that, it was just crazy. And excuse me, because I'm starting to get a little emotional when I talk about this. But so I sat in the chair for, I don't know how long, but the mushrooms started to hit me. And it was unlike anything that I had ever had. Not that there was really much in the way of great visual distortion or hallucinations or anything. This was, to me, in some ways very similar to Huachuma, how Huachuma is to me now. It was an emotional feeling. It was a mental experience. This was more powerful than anything I had ever experienced, and I, to this day, I can say with certainty, it wasn't the mushrooms, it was the power and the energy from all who went before me that was there, standing at me and looking at me and saying, "Okay, Michael, what are you going to do now?" And I sat there and I looked at that wall for a couple of hours, and there became a point where I thought, I'm going to lose my mind. I didn't know what was going to happen to me, but I started to feel an impending doom. I started feeling just grave. And the mushroom, the mushroom spirits, the mushroom gods, the powers to be, started to talk to me about my past mushroom experiences. And I felt very welcome where I was at. I understood that where I was at was where I was supposed to be. But the mushrooms started to really hammer me and really chastise me, really counsel me on how I used mushrooms in the past. And so I'd just like to say that, going through all of my experiences in life, I mentioned drug abuse and alcohol abuse and stuff like that. And many times, and actually for some periods of my life, most times, when I would eat mushrooms, I would eat some pretty large doses. And towards the end of the mushroom experience, when the deep learning was coming out, when the pain was coming out, the healing was coming out, I'd start drinking alcohol. Because that part of it was like so tough for me, because the mushrooms were bringing out old trauma that I needed to face. But instead of facing it,
you were numbing it.
I was numbing it. And in that moment, there was no beer in that room. It was just me, the curandera, and those four walls. And I had to make a decision. And the decision was to open my heart and listen to what the energy was telling me. And then, finally, I started to have some visions. And I started to see young people in my life, in my family, young people that I knew. I'm talking about people in their teens and early 20s. And the medicine was telling me, it's like, Michael, you have this special gift. And look at how you're conducting yourself. Look at the example that you're setting for younger people. These kids are going out and they're buying mushrooms and they're eating mushrooms and drinking alcohol and driving and doing all this crazy shit. And you're the example. And what are you going to do about that? And it got painful. It got really painful, and I got really scared because the visions just were flashing before my eyes, just one after another. I would see a nephew of mine. I would see one of my best friend's kids, who I knew were using mushrooms and who were going to probably go down this path further. And I knew about what was happening with the decriminalization and the medical use of psilocybin and all of these things. I was having these visions, and the mushrooms were telling me, what are you going to do? Are you going to be an example? Are you going to demonstrate to people the proper path and how to walk it? Are you going to stop doing what you've been doing? What are you going to do? And it scared me. It was more than I could handle, actually. And I stood up and I looked at the curandera and I pointed at the bed, and she shook her head yes. And so I laid down in the bed and I put a blanket over me, and when I did, the universe just exploded. And I think a lot of people would actually call what I experienced a bad trip. And certainly in the past, that experience, I would have been drinking a lot. But I laid there under the blankets, and I took the visions, I took the energy, I took it. I went through what the medicine asked me to go through. I looked at it, I took it in, I understood it. And when I thought that I had had enough, and I hoped that it would be over. It only got worse, and it continued. And I had these different types of entities. Some of them that were evil, and some of them were friendly and loving, but they were all going around me, and a lot of them weren't happy, and they were letting me know, they were teaching me a lesson was what was going on here, and they were telling me, what you were doing was wrong, and they were showing me, but what they were telling me, then I had these other good entities that were telling me, hey, but you are connected, and your intentions are good, you're just messing it up, and you just need a little bit of help. But I used to kind of preach a little bit, not preach, but mushrooms, I used to think were all about love and different things, and about loving people, and definitely about healing. But I had some very strange visions. I had some visions of people with tattoos on their faces and like dragon-like teeth getting in my face going, "You don't love me, do you? I don't love you." And they were just like this. It was a whirlwind over and over of emotions, from love to anger to hatred to just all mixing it in there. And the mushrooms telling me that all of these emotions are part of you. And just because it's part of you doesn't mean it's love. And it was a good lesson. It really was. It really changed my mind about when you're going through healing, trauma and bad things come out. And it can be accepted just for what it is. I don't need to ignore it and turn it into something that it wasn't. And that was a really powerful lesson for me. And so, anyways, laying there on the bed, I went through a lot of trauma. And finally, I got to the point where I felt like I couldn't take it anymore. And I said to myself, if this doesn't stop, I'm going to run out of here screaming, and I don't know what's going to happen, right? And that sounds really stupid, because at that point in my life, I had definitely taken mushrooms thousands of times. And so I thought, yeah, there's no way that that's going to happen. But like, I was overwhelming me so much. And finally I stood up, and I thought I was going for the door. And I walked over and sat back down in the chair. And I stared at the wall for another hour. And when I did that, everything started calming down. Everything started to come together in my mind as far as why I was here and what was going to happen to me after that. And I actually want to say that I had, maybe not voices, but I had energy talking to me, congratulating me for making the right decision to sit in that chair and to face what I had created and be able to put it to bed and to be able to step forward on my new journey in mushrooms and mushroom healing.
So how did it end?
So how it ended was I just sat there, and it finally started to wash off and wear off. And mushrooms are for me about a 4 to 6 hour experience. So about 4.5 hours, the curandera came to me, and she started smudging me again and blowing smoke on me and rubbing some herbs on me. And she came around to the front and she asked me, "Are you okay?" And I told her that I was. And she looked at me really closely, and she walked on, and she finally got up and she came over and she started smudging me again. And went through about 15 minutes of that, rubbing herbs on me and blowing probably pacho smoke or some type of tobacco smoke. And then she came around in front of me and she asked me if I was okay. And I said, yeah, I'm fine. I felt good. At that time, I had really come down, and I felt like I was in control of my motor skills and my thoughts, and I felt like I was okay to leave. So she left the room for a moment, and 5 minutes later, she came back in and she said, okay, you can leave. And that was it. I walked out of there, and the grandson met me at the gate, and he said, I have a taxi for you. And I got in the taxi and I left. And that was the end of my experience there, but not really. because when I came here to Huachuma Wasi, so my first time, so let me just say this. When I left Oaxaca after that experience, I didn't take mushrooms again for a while. I had some deep reflection that I knew that I needed to do, and I had to really think about, I didn't want to have a knee-jerk reaction and say, oh, I can change, I'm going to do this, and this is what I really needed to take the time to think about what happened and to ask myself, Michael, do you have the capacity to do what needs to be done? Because my life has been so chaotic, from the time I was a young boy, that I really knew, like I learned from that experience how important this was. And I had to really question myself for a while. Do I have the capacity? Do I have the desire? Do I have the discipline? Do I have what it takes inside of me? Because I knew this is an extremely important thing, that if I'm going to be an ambassador of the mushroom, if I'm going to be somebody who is helping to heal others or bring others into mushroom healing, it can only be one way. I have to walk in the love of the mushroom with good intention and gratitude every minute of the day. It can't be any other way. I learned that. And so I didn't do mushrooms for several months after that. And one day before I came to Huachuma Wasi, the first time I took a little microdose. Like, I didn't even expect to have an experience off of it. And with just a tiny little bit like that, I had a full psychedelic experience. And in that experience, the mushroom was very welcoming to me. And it was like I started in my meditations and in my thoughts in meditation that I was thinking about it over and over. I was saying, oh, is this going to go sideways? Is this going to start to get bad? What's going to happen? And the entire time the mushroom spoke to me and said, that's the past. That Michael is gone. And they made that crystal clear to me. It was a wonderful, loving, blissful experience. And so I had that one experience, and then I came to Huachuma Wasi, and we did our healing, and that's another story in another video. But throughout my time here, after probably about 10 ceremonies, Huachuma medicine started to speak to me on behalf of the mushrooms, telling me that, Michael, when you go back, you need to get back into your relationship with the mushrooms. The cactus medicine made that perfectly clear for me, that is so important to get back on your path. And so when I went home, I didn't get back on my path necessarily, but I definitely started to work some stuff out. So I microdosed. I probably took about maybe eight different times where I had a mushroom experience. Most of those were microdoses. I did have two very higher dose, stronger experiences. And every time that I did it, the mushrooms came to me and were thanking me. Thank you for coming back. We love you. We're so happy that you're back. They were just overjoyed that I was there. And the main topics that I was thinking about in these experiences had to do with what's happening in America right now, with all of the development of new techniques for administering psilocybin, for counseling, for healing, for all of these different things. And then there's legalization, decriminalization and legalization that's happening in states across America, specifically in Oregon, which I live less than an hour drive from the Oregon border. And I was starting to see mushrooms in a different light. I was starting to see young kids eating mushrooms and people who were not guided, not with good intentions, not with gratitude, using mushrooms. And these things that never disturbed me before were starting to disturb me. And the voices were speaking to me, telling me that, Michael, you have to continue with your mushroom use, and you need to be an example for others, and you need to figure out your path. And for the first time ever, I sat down and set myself up an altar, and I started to talk to myself about, how does this look if I'm going to sit here at the altar and actually begin to administer to people in ceremony. I had never done that before in my life. It was always in a different fashion. It was always in a personal one-on-one space where we sat down and we discussed, very deeply. And there was nothing. It wasn't not a sacred experience. It just wasn't. It wasn't what I know that it can be now, and I learned that through Huachuma medicine, and I understand now that altar has everything to do with intention and gratitude. And I knew that was missing from my past. And so for the first time ever, I sat down and started to work that out, literally with writing things down and drawing and saying, okay, this is how it's going to work. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to bring the energy out in me that I want to transfer into the medicine and to other people that I'm working with. And so I left that there. It's a project that's unfinished, but that's going to continue when I get back. But as you know, 2 months after leaving here the first time, I came back. And because I realized that I had some unfinished business here. And so yesterday's ceremony was a really breakthrough ceremony with regards to mushroom energy for me. And it was my 6th ceremony yesterday. And for the first time, I sat down with you and I shared my Sierra Madre Oaxaca experience with you. And I really appreciate the love and energy that you gave to me yesterday. It helped me to see my experience in Oaxaca in a different light. I knew it was a very special thing, but I just wasn't. I hadn't got to a place where I was able to integrate that or to fully understand what happened to me. I was really overwhelmed by the energy. It was loving and very happy, but I was still a little bit confused about what happened. And so yesterday in ceremony, when I explained all that to you, you kind of laid it out for me. It helped me to understand what happened there. And after that conversation, when you left, I laid down and I just wanted to meditate for a while about what we had talked about. And as soon as I closed my eyes, the mushrooms started to talk to me again and said, Michael, when you leave here, you've got to continue what you've been doing. And I've heard that many times on Huachuma medicine, but the very different thing this time was that when my eyes were closed and after I heard these messages, the next thing I saw in front of my face with my eyes closed was Maria Sabina, and she was like right in my face looking at me, and she was going like this. She was chewing mushrooms, and it was just like on some of the videos that I've seen now on YouTube of her when, taken back in the late 70s or early 70s when she's chewing on mushrooms and she's, working in her sacred space. But when I saw that vision, there was no communication other than it was an acknowledgement. It was an acknowledgement that, what took you so long? Kind of like that, it's like you're back, you're here, and I approve. Mm-hmm. And that's what I felt. And so I'm very grateful for that experience, and I'm going to take the rest of my time here at Huachuma Wasi to continue with my healing and continue to work on the things that I know I need to work on. But I am also going to use that cactus energy to help reconnect me and start me on my new path with psilocybin-containing mushrooms. And I'm just so grateful and also amazed. I had no idea that Huachuma medicine could speak, can communicate with me, or communicate with people across other plant medicine energy fields, if you know what I'm saying. Like, since I've been here, I've come in contact with other people who have had similar stories with ayahuasca and other plant medicine. And here I'm watching cactus medicine communicate to me through mushroom medicine, or mushroom medicine communicating to me through cactus medicine. Mm-hmm. And I've heard the same story from other people where ayahuasca is communicating to a person through the cactus as well. And it really helped me to see a lot of things because I've always been told, okay, Huachuma is the grandfather and the king of all plant medicine. And I really never understood what that meant. And that really put it in perspective with me that that Huachuma can reach across all energy fields in the universe to communicate and to heal.
Yeah, I think they all can. You
Yeah.
know, they're all connected. You know, this is how I found peyote in Mexico, through Huachuma. So I completely resonate with that. Either peyote was talking to me through Huachuma, or Huachuma was talking to me through peyote. I don't know, but it happened in Peru when I found peyote in the vision, and then I found it in Mexico. You know, so it's a story for another time. But I totally understand what you're saying, and I have Sierra Madre connection in me too, through my peyote connection in Mexico, through the Huichol Indians that I found there. And it's interesting that, you know, Maria Sabina, I was fascinated with her too in my, you know, before I moved to Peru, before I found shamans here and my path here. And I wanted to find her and do the proper, shamanic experience there. But then instead I was led to peyote in Nayarit, in Mexico. So my path took me in different direction a little bit, and so Maria Sabina kind of stayed in a peripheral, like all this mushroom traditional Mexico, that it was there, but I was taken around it into the peyote directly. But it's interesting that now, like, well, 15 years later, you are here telling me about the story, and I'm playing a certain part in bringing this out to people, and very honored to do that and facilitate that, So, yeah, all plants are connected, and what's happening to you is totally real, I kind of gave up long ago the idea of understanding how it works, because I don't think we can understand. It just works, and we witness it, and we work with it, and we communicate, and we in it. But how it works is the same thing as to ask how Huachuma heals you, or how ayahuasca heals you, or how mushrooms heals you. Like, we don't know really. We just know that it does work, But how it works, this is magic. This is what ancient shamanic traditions are about,
Right.
That they bring the magic on the surface, and that heals you, and that changes you, So that was really powerful story, Thank you for sharing, and I could feel that yesterday when we talked about this. I could feel that was important, that we talk about this today and make a video and share with people that, first of all, the family of Maria Sabina is real, and the lineage is still there, whether it's through her, to other people. But, this is important to mention. A real shamanic lineage never dies. It finds its way like a mountain river finds its way down the hill. Doesn't matter how many rocks on the road, the river is unstoppable. It will gravitate towards the ocean eventually. So the same thing with the shamanic lineage, it never dies. It just goes through different people. It can be through children, it can be through relatives, it can be through completely strangers, But the lineage has to find its carriers. And it's not racist. It can be anyone, can be any person who feel the call, who hear the call, who answer the call, and who, embrace the mission, you can say, if that's what the person wants. So this is an important point to make, that it's kind of a misconception that people think that to carry the tradition you have to be an Indian, you have to be born in Peru, in Mexico. No, that's all untrue. You don't have to be born here. Like, I born in Ukraine, under Soviet regime, and it was a long way for me to come home and to carry Huachuma tradition in me. It's one of many carriers, but that just shows you that you don't have to be a native born for this. You can be a white gringo from anywhere in the world. But if the medicine is calling you and you hear the call and you're capable of taking it, then you take it. So if mushroom call you, and from what I hear, that was like the Mexico. It was the actual initiation into this. Your experience at Maria Sabina was initiation into the mushroom tradition. All what you have done before was experiences, was kind of exploring, but that was actual initiation. Same thing happened to me with peyote, with ritual Indians there in Mexico. Also, my initiation into spirit was there. Although my path began in Peru, and I lived in Peru, and I said Huachuma and worked with ayahuasca here. But my shamanic initiation was in Mexico, actually, where I died and reborn there, So it's all connected. It's like it was in Mexico, but I live in Peru. That's okay,
right?
Because the calling came from here, but it had to involve other medicines and other experiences and other traditions to bring me to a point where things could be given to me in a proper way, So it's totally fine. So you can be initiated in Mexico, you can live in America, anywhere,
Well, I would like to say that the calling to return to Oaxaca, and to return to Maria Sabina's compound, to use mushrooms again in a ceremonial setting is very powerful now, more than ever. Like really, when I laid up last night, I was laying in bed thinking about this, and I don't know when it's going to happen. Probably next summertime, around there, when the mushrooms start to grow again in Mexico, the fresh ones. I'm going to take another trip back, and this trip is surely for gratitude, to thank them for what they did for me, and to dive back into the medicine and see where my path starts to take me. I really want this to be in light of what's happening in America now with mushrooms. I really want this to be right. I really want to make the right decisions and to be the right example that people need right now.
It's very important because, I also have an issue with that. And, it's like, from one hand, I am for decriminalization, nature. And I think it's absolutely ridiculous that people go to jail for using plants. It's just completely idiotic, and wrong. That should stop. And I'm all for it, On the other hand, what I see missing is the education, that it doesn't come with decriminalization.
Correct.
Because, American society is just, it's a Western society. They don't understand spirit. Spirit is not part of the collective consciousness or subconsciousness, It's not even a part of vocabulary, So it's so important to, with decriminalization, to bring education and to lead people in the right direction of ceremonial use of sacred plants, or mushrooms in that, in that sense, which is completely absent, and that will lead to problems.
It will, and I just would like to say something here, and I will say that this is my opinion, but I'm pretty sure I'm right on this. And so I have communicated with others, not verbally, but through emails and through messages and stuff, and through reading reviews at Maria Sabina's place or her museum and stuff. And I have heard quite a few people really bash them and speak negatively about them. And what I've learned from the medicine and from this experience is that the people who do that are people who show up there and are not connected and they're not willing to do the work. And they come there and they're looking for a psilocybin joyride. And then they walk into this room with four walls completely bare, and they're very disappointed. And I'll even say that when I got there, I wasn't disappointed, but I certainly expected something else. Like I had these visions that I created in my own mind of this psychedelic altar with candles and mushroom stuff. And when I came into the room, that's not what it was. And you know what I realized? You're not here for a joyride. You're here to work.
Yeah.
And a lot of people go there and they don't go with that intention. And my intention when I got there was to work. And so I think that some of the negative things that you hear about out there from people are from people who showed up there with different intentions and different expectations.
Yeah, they want a trip.
They want a trip.
You know, it's like same pretty much here. Same thing happens here too. If you come here to trip with us, you know, you will be disappointed because we're not really tripping here. This is a serious healing work that takes you deep inside yourself, makes you face yourself and think and understand, and you know, the real thing. You get here the real thing. You don't get the firework in the sky. You know what I mean? It's the same with Maria Sabina. It's a real shamanic experience when you have an opportunity to face the truth, see the truth within yourself and in the world, and come out of it as a better person, which might not be necessarily an easy journey. You know, shamanic experience not an easy journey. You know, it has its own beauty for sure, and we have a lot of beauty in Huachuma here. So this is the most beautiful medicine by far, you know. But even here, you work on yourself. You have to face yourself, you know, face the truth and embrace it and find strength to deal with it. So people who went there and kind of left a negative feedback, they just weren't ready for the real shamanic experience, you know. That speaks about them, not about Maria Sabina.
Right.
It's like that. But the whole thing that, you know, that is happening in America, you know, it certainly needs direction, because it will end bad, and it will end in prohibition, because some stupid people will take mushrooms and will you know, drink alcohol and, you know, drive somewhere and kill someone, and that will be the end of the whole story. And then the government will come and say, look what you did. We just give it to you. You asked, we gave it to you, and then look what you're doing. So that's not good. It's a direct movement towards the end of it. You know, if you don't bring spiritual education, if you don't do things right, at least somewhat resembling the spiritual tradition of the ancient time, that will not end well. And that's what I'm afraid. And I don't want to see that, because it's a good medicine for people. If you do it right, it can help you with so many things. You know, it's a good thing to have available, but has to be properly done. And for this, people need to learn from ancient people, from ancient traditions. Like we learn from ancient traditions here. You know, if you want to drink ayahuasca, you go work with shipibos. If you want to, drink peyote, you go drink with rituals. I mean, these are the carriers. These are the lineage holders, you know. So you have to get it from the source, you know. If you want to have if you want to drink Huachuma, we'll definitely come here and have it and see what we're doing here, you know. That's how you do it. Like, I'm against people just going and chewing cactus in the mountains. I'm totally against that. Or buying ayahuasca and playing with it. It's like this is dangerous and stupid and disrespectful way to do plant medicine, you know. So this is the same with mushrooms. Mushrooms, powerful teacher, you know, whether it's a plant or an animal, whatever you call it, but it's a teacher, you know. So it's very important to lead people to this understanding. You want to do mushroom, find someone who have the connection and who can lead you and who can open up the spiritual dimension for you. You know, and same with every other plant teacher. Super important.
I agree. And what I'm seeing right now in America is that they're taking the mushrooms now to the doctor's office, and that's the setting.
You know, plant medicine, it's something you do. First of all, always you do it in nature. Nature is the space holder. You never do it in a building, you know. With the mushroom, it's a bit different because you actually can do it. But when it comes to Huachuma or peyote, this is a medicine of nature, you know. So, and definitely not in the city, you know. It's like, has to be in the mountains, in the selva, it's like forest somewhere, but you have to be connected to nature energies, to frequency of nature. So, and then you have to do it in a certain, you know, of course, setting, super important.
Yes.
It's like, it's a basic of the experience. And the person who mediated for you, the person who bring his or her knowledge into it, and his or her connection to the spirits of the plants and to the tradition behind it. That's how you do it in the proper way. Because what you get, you don't just get the alkaloid content. That's a Western misconception. That's what I write in my books about. You know, there is more to Huachuma, more to Huachuma than just mescaline.
The spirit's in the plant, not in the chemical.
Here it's like the whole, this is like thousands of years tradition right here. Thousands of years, thousands of people, thousands of healers and healing ceremonies are in this cactus. The whole culture is in it. It's so much more than just a mescaline content. You know, I don't work with the mescaline. I don't know how much mescaline is in my cup when I give you my medicine. There is no way for me to measure, and I don't care. I work with the spirit of the plant. We have a different communication. You know, I know what I'm giving you, but I don't know how much mescaline is in the cup. You know, this is not a laboratory, you know, 300 milligram or 350. I don't know, man. What I give you is good. Because, you know what I mean?
I do.
It's like, but you see, it's like there is more to mushroom than psilocybin. There is more to ayahuasca than DMT in chacruna leaves. That's what people don't understand. This is like a Western ignorance when it comes to plant medicine and shamanism, you know. So hopefully that will change one day and people will open up to the whole shamanic dimension that is present here. And it's actually timeless. It's here, and it was here thousands of years ago, and it's still here, and it will be here. You know, it's like it's up to you to reach out to it. But it's here. It's not going anywhere, because this is the mind of the planet. It's a planetary mind. You know, it's not going away as long as the planet is here, as long as we have atmosphere, and we don't nuke each other. It will be here. You know. So that's just super important context to put the plant medicine in. Any plant medicine you work with. Any. So I'm against this kind of misuse of plants that ends badly. I mean, you can mess up your mind pretty badly, you know, on anything. You can just freak out and you will never come back from that. You know, it will be very hard to heal that later because you will be so fearful of another experience that you will not be able to heal that trauma, and you will be living with that trauma for the rest of your life, completely blocked from healing. That's the problem.
Well, a good example of that is I have several very close friends of mine who will never do mushrooms again.
Because of that?
Probably because of misuse, yeah.
Yeah.
Because of a bad experience, because of improper setting.
Everything was wrong.
Zero gratitude, zero intentions.
Everything they did was wrong. How, where, when, why, everything was wrong. Of course you will have a bad trip. It's a guaranteed thing. if you do drunk driver, I mean, it's not going to end well.
No.
You know what I mean? It's just the same thing here. It's like a guaranteed thing. And now they are blocked from the real opportunity to understand themselves in the most profound way a human being can do. Nothing can be more profound than a powerful plant-based shamanic experience. Nothing can be more transformative than that. You know, and now they're blocked from this because they had bad trip, because they did everything wrong about it. And nobody taught them, nobody told them. Just took mushroom, went to discotheque. Probably the stupidest thing you can do. You know?
Yep.
It's hard to imagine anything worse. Well, driving would be worse.
You know, I laugh because I certainly had that time in my life where I did that, but I look back on it and maybe I needed to do that now because the knowledge I carry within me now, having had those experiences, is I see it 360 degrees now, from the good to the bad, to all of it, when it comes to that.
Yeah.
And I've really
Well, you
learned
have
some-
the whole picture.
the whole picture, correct?
Because you're the carrier, you're the messenger. So for you, it was important to have those experiences. But I don't recommend people have.
No,
I
of course
recommend
not.
people do it right and get the benefit, see it as a medicine, change their lives, heal themselves, you know, and just create a better world for everybody.
That's the plan.
That's the plan, you know, that's what we're doing here, you know, with this medicine. But everything contained, each medicine contained other medicines. Yeah. This is why ayahuasca sending people here often to complete the journey.
This is why mushrooms are sending people here.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then from here, people go back to where they came from, back to ayahuasca, back to mushrooms, but differently. They go differently. It's like it's a full circle, you know. It's like you have all these experiences in you, and you feel complete, you feel whole, and you carry the teaching of each, and then together you bring it in the best way possible to people, you know. So absolutely, I would love to hear about your mushroom path after all this what we're doing here, because it's going to be different.
I definitely plan on sharing it, and I don't know where it's going to go, but it's definitely going to be a path, and a good one.
It is a path.
Yeah.
That was the teaching in Mexico.
Sure, but whether it's going to be in the form of actually holding ceremony or being more just an educational and guiding and bringing people to different places, it's hard for me to say. I see that there probably will be
It's
some.
both.
Both, yeah.
It's what you can be theoretical about experience.
No,
you
for
know.
sure no. But there's more that I want to get out there and learn, is what I mean. Like on that path, you know, ceremony back down in Oaxaca, and wherever else that path takes me.
Yeah, maybe we'll meet there someday to visit Maria Sabina's compound. Yeah,
That would be wonderful. Mushrooms and then peyote.
and I'll bring some Huachuma with me for sure. Yeah, no, that would be beautiful, and it would be also good to add peyote to your menu.
That's definitely in my plans. I've had visions of this, and
But it comes in its time, you know.
Mhm.
You just wait for this. They have to call you. It's something. It's something that you just wait, and then when it's clear, then you just go. You know, you don't force it.
when the time comes, it'll be an
Yeah.
honor.
Yeah, but then it's a full circle. All the medicines, you know, it's really the medicines of the South and North America. You know, Huachuma Wasi here, peyote, and mushrooms in Mexico, and it's all they were all working together. Yeah. So when you work with all of them in different time of your life, then you have a pretty good picture of the whole continental cultural shamanism as it was done here for thousands of years, which is truly amazing, you know. Well, Michael, that was a powerful story. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for giving me the
Yeah,
opportunity.
of course. And I'm glad that,
It's very healing for me to talk about this.
yeah, I understand how. We're bringing it to the surface. We're processing it together. And in the medicine, you will see more about this after after this conversation, after this story has been out. You will feel differently about this. Like tomorrow we'll have a ceremony, you will look into it and you will feel differently about the whole thing. And I'm certain that there will be some clarity about this and new insights as you have completed a certain task by sharing this. It's a part of the journey for sure. That's why I want to share that.
Okay.
So let's see how it's going tomorrow, and if Maria Sabina come to visit or not, it's okay too. It's like when you're connected, like it doesn't matter who comes to visit. It's like when you're connected to spirit, it doesn't matter. She's okay. She's there. Wonderful. Hi. Say hi. If not, that's okay too. It's like we're in the same space.
I think the first thing I'll say is thank you.
Yeah, that's the right words.
Yeah.
It's the only thing you can't say.
That's it. Thank you.
Everything else is unnecessary. It's a thank you in the silence. Really, that's what it is. It's a gratitude, silent gratitude. Well, thank you, Michael, very much. I enjoyed talking about this.
I do too.
And
Thank you.
I'm glad that I have someone who actually went there and had a real experience there. And someone with a lot of experience too. It's not just anyone. It's someone with with thousands of mushroom experiences who went there and had that experience there. To me personally, it says a lot about them. So what is your message to people of the world who are looking to psilocybin and excited about decriminalization? Finally, they will be able, hopefully, to work with mushrooms without looking for police cars.
Well, I think certainly what I've really learned, gratitude's always there, but intention, and to ask people to two things: education and intention, and to ask yourself really, why am I doing this? And then if the answer is I just want to get messed up and have a good time, understand there can be severe consequences from that can last the rest of your life. That's number one. Number two, if your answer is, I have some problems, that I want to deal with, then you need to dig deeper into that and to specifically know exactly why you're doing your intentions need to be pure when you go into this for it to be really effective. I really believe that. And the next thing is that I offer to people is that there's, especially in the age of Google, there's so much information out there. Knowledge is king. Get out there and load up on information. Learn about how indigenous people, how cultures before us use these medicines and why they use the medicines. What were their intentions behind it? Learn the creation stories of how these medicines, how the indigenous people say that these medicines came to Earth and why they came to Earth. Learn these things and be respectful of the medicine.
Yeah.
Education and intentions and gratitude.
Respect.
Respect,
the
for
key.
sure.
Absolutely.
Respect.
Sounds good.
And I think also understand that I've had multiple bad trips on mushrooms in my life, and I always came back to it. But the important thing that for people to know is when it just gets so difficult to where you're just like, I can't take this anymore. Pay close attention and focus, because that's where the lesson is. Don't run from it. Don't mask it with alcohol and other drugs. The lesson is there in the difficult parts of it. You got to embrace that and look at yourself That's a mirror right there in that moment. That's a mirror inside of yourself. Embrace that and listen to what it's saying. Big mistake I ever made was not listening to the medicine. Embrace the difficult part of it. That's a mirror into you. And so I think I'd just like to add, since we were talking about embracing the difficult times within plant medicine, and for me specifically in mushrooms, I'd just like to bring up a time that I think the viewers would find quite interesting. And it has to do with the time when I was taking mushrooms, and during that time I was frequenting a couple of different plant medicine websites online. And there was a trend going on where people were taking mushrooms and they were mixing harmalas in with it, so specifically harmaline and tetrahydroharmaline. And all of the trip reports that came back from that were very powerful. And so my curiosity got the best of me one day, and so what I did is I ordered the tetrahydroharmaline and harmaline from a trusted entheogenic chemical supplier online. And one day I decided to sit down and eat a rather large dose of mushrooms. And on top of that, I added a healthy dose of tetrahydroharmaline, which is one of the chemicals that potentiates DMT in ayahuasca. And so I didn't put a lot of thought into it. I just thought, yeah, okay, this is just going to be another mushroom trip. And so as the mushroom trip started to go, I started to feel something a lot different than my normal mushroom trip, and it became a lot more powerful. And really quick, within an hour into the experience, I started to feel some things that I never felt before, and it really started to scare me. And I recognized that the mushroom experience was starting to go south. It was starting to go bad. And I was really, 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 really high on the mushrooms, and I started to become very scared. And I started to have thoughts that maybe I was dying, and some bad things were happening to me physically. So I remember crawling on the floor to my wife, who was inside watching TV, and I told her, I said, honey, I need you to take me to the hospital. And she looked at me, and she knew what I was going to do. And she looked at me and she goes, are you serious? She goes, what's wrong? And I said, I'm really feeling sick. I feel like I might be dying. And she didn't know what to do, but I insisted. I said, you need to take me to the hospital. And so right now, exactly. And so she said, okay, let's get into the car and I'll take you. And she was a little bit worried. And so I couldn't drive. So I got in the passenger seat of our truck, and she got in and she started to drive me. And so if you can picture this for a second, the road is going down through the woods in Washington State, and it's a nice Doug fir farm type forest. And above the road is the open sky, and it's nice and blue. And we're driving down the road, and she's going pretty fast, trying to get me there. And all of a sudden I looked up, and I saw an eagle flying above the windshield right in front of the truck. And when I saw this, I started to think of movies and things that I had read about Native Americans when they die, and about their spirit animal coming to take their soul away and up to heaven. And that just intensified everything. And it was very interesting because from that point where the eagle intercepted the truck, the eagle flew with the truck for probably 2 or 3 minutes until we got to the freeway, to get on the freeway to go to the hospital. And then at that point, the eagle just flew away. But the amount of fear that brought to me, because I thought for sure this is my spirit animal and that I was soon going to the afterlife. Well, that didn't happen. And a 5-minute drive later, I ended up at a place where an ambulance picked me up and took me to the hospital. So we got to the hospital, and they realized that there was something wrong with me, and they were worried that I was sick. But what they didn't understand at the moment is I was having an anxiety attack from the mushrooms and the harmaline that I had taken. And so they brought me into a quiet room, and they laid me down on the bed, and my wife was in there. And as I was there, the feelings started to intensify, and they became really serious, and I thought that I was going to expire any moment. And at that time, the doctor came in and started talking to my wife. And I was looking at them both from the bed, and I was hallucinating a bit. And all of a sudden, I saw myself going down a dark tunnel. And at that point, I knew that I was dying. What I didn't understand is that I was just experiencing ego death. And now looking back on it, that's exactly what happened. My ego was dying, just from the medicine that I had taken and my inability to just calm myself down and face what was happening to me. And I watched my wife and the doctor talking, and in my mind, I could hear them saying, I could hear the doctor tell my wife, "I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do for your husband." And when I heard him say that, I watched myself fall deeper and deeper down this dark, endless abyss, and the light got smaller and smaller and smaller. And I thought, oh my God, this is it. I'm dead. I'm dying. I'm dead. And I laid there for a little while, and then all of a sudden the doctor walked into the room, and he talked to me, and he said, "Hello, Michael, how are you doing today? Can you tell me what's going on?" And at that moment, I realized I was alive, and I didn't want to die. And I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Yes, I ate a big dose of magic mushrooms, and I took some harmaline and tetrahydroharmaline to intensify it." And he looked at me for a second, and he said, "Well, I know what mushrooms are, but I don't know what the other stuff is. So let me go back into my office and do some research on the internet, and I'll come back and see you."
Hang on there. I'm not ready here.
So I laid there suffering and suffering for about another 5 to 10 minutes, and when he came back in, he had an injection for me of some kind of
neutralizer or something.
Yeah, it was a like Xanax, Ativan I think is what it was. And they gave me a shot of it, and he said, "Listen, this is going to calm you down, and you can just lay here for a little while until you feel better." And that was it. I never saw the doctor again after that. I will say that the Ativan had no effect on me whatsoever. The mushroom trip and the harmaline that I took just marched on and beat me and beat me and beat me the rest of the time that I was there. And that's my story of probably the worst bad trip that I've ever had. And I will say it was out of a couple thousand mushroom trips. I've had several really bad trips, but that one right there was the one where I experienced.
One time hospital, or you went to hospital?
One time, and that's the one time that I experienced ego death. There was just nothing I could do. There was no beer I could drink. There was nowhere I could run. I was just me on that table going down into the darkness.
Man,
most people would be too embarrassed to tell that story, but it's...
No, I think it's a great story. I have similar stories, but that's
But I learned a lot from that. You know, when you're talking about master plants, whether it's Huachuma, ayahuasca, or mushrooms, I've learned that the plant is enough. It's perfection already,
Yeah.
and there's no need to add anything to that.
Yeah.
And anything to that just takes
Just
away
greed.
from the healing and the
It's just greed,
experience.
and that's it. Just being greedy. That's all it is. It's like a pile of mushrooms. It's more than enough. You don't need harmone, whatever you do there. It's just some plants work in combination, but really, when you make connection with each of them, it's like it's enough. You learn from each, and then you learn from another one. Well, that's a great story. Thanks for sharing. It's a good example of what not to do.
Yes.
Well,
I think those experiences, and I've had a lot of experiences of what not to do, and I think that living through those experiences has just made me that much stronger of a person and much more understanding, much more compassionate. Yeah, just, I guess, more experience, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it adds to your knowledge, for sure. It just comes with a price. Mm-hmm. If you're willing to pay,
Well, that's one that I would never do again.
What's the conclusion? And then
from
this experience,
Right. The conclusion For me, what I learned from the experience is, like I said, number one is that the plant is perfection in itself. And number two, that when I'm having these bad experiences, I need to sit down and look at myself, into my mind, into my heart, and accept what's happening to me. And my wife explained it to me perfect.
Accept the greed.
Exactly.
The
Accept
greedy
it.
Michael, who wants more.
And my wife told me, she said, if you ever come to me again and ask me to take you to the hospital while you're taking psychedelics, I will not do it. And so that
Just die.
that's pretty
You
much
know?
what she said. But it's just accepting well enough as it is, accepting the perfection of the plant,
Yeah.
accepting the lesson, and being strong and looking within inside of myself and seeing the lessons and taking the hard ones just like the good ones and learning from it.
Yeah, it's a good lesson. It's a good teaching, you know. It's really what you say. It's important. You know, it's really enough, and it's important to be humble about this in terms and grateful. If you already have an experience, you're already having this amazing journey within yourself. Be grateful for that. Be grateful, because this is still a privileged place
For sure.
to be, you know, although it becomes more known, but it's still a privileged place to be. So if you're already there, you know, appreciate,
Accept and appreciate
enjoy,
the lessons
you know?
that are being taught. Open my mind, open my heart, and accept that. And don't try to take it any further.
Yeah,
Because one thing I've learned about psychedelics, especially mushrooms and Huachuma, you might not always get what you want, but you always get what you need.
yeah, that's true. So you have to trust the medicine. Trust the medicine. That's the key to all of it. You know, it knows. And if you don't trust, then when you get in trouble, then you turn it upside down. Then it becomes difficult. Then,
Right.
you know.
Well, I certainly feel like on that day, the medicine understood that I needed a lesson.
Yeah.
And that
And it
day,
gave you.
I got what I needed.
Yeah, it's painful lessons, you know. Lessons on greed are very painful, very tough to deal with. Especially with Huachuma, because this is never-ending journey. You know, mushroom you down with 6 hours. Huachuma, it's a half journey. You know, and even the third way, it's a 1/3 of the way when it's a strong dose. You know, so if you get that kind of lesson of Huachuma, that's a long journey. You know, that's a lot of crying.
That's a
Man.
journey I'm not looking
Yeah.
for at all.
That's a lot of crying, man. And this just never-ending thing. It's just stuck there. You feel like you're like forever stuck in eternity of greed.
Eternal suffering.
You know. So these lessons are painful. So you just have to learn to respect the medicine, and you will not have that.
A valuable lesson that I treasure,
Mm-hmm.
for sure.